Here at home, there were the repercussions of the Republican electoral victories in last fall's elections, not just in Washington, but in statehouses across the country. Though they well know that they were swept into office due to unemployment and a weak economic recovery on the one hand, and voter ignorance and lack of memory on the other, the GOP in D.C. is acting like they have a mandate for gutting Planned Parenthood, public radio and television, and the EPA. And even worse, in the states, they're seizing on budget shortfalls to try to crush public employee unions. John Nichols is a wise and fiery advocate for working and middle-class Americans and for robust media and democracy. Not only that, he's from Wisconsin, where he is an associate editor of the Madison Times. John Nichols is a Washington correspondent for The Nation, and as I said, associate editor of the Capital Times in Madison, Wisconsin. He's the author of Jews for Buchanan and co-author with Robert McChesney of Our Media, Not Theirs, The Democratic Struggle Against Corporate Media. Welcome again, John Nichols.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the ideas and the work, and I'm going to tell you, I had you on the show before. I'd read your work, but I recall the first time I saw you speak in person. It was actually at an event down in Venice, and you came off less like an objective journalist than a Southern preacher or a political organizer. Can you talk a little bit about how you mix journalism and activism?
Sure. I take my cue from Tom Paine, the journalist who called the American experiment into being. And the fact of the matter is that there are many kinds of journalists, and I respect people who approach it from different directions. But the journalism that I have always practiced is one that seeks to speak truth to power. And I will certainly do so in my columns and the pages of magazines I write for and news reports as well. I'll try to do so always accurately and fairly. But the fact is that when I learn things along the way, I will not hesitate to speak publicly and loudly about what I hope that I understand and about what I hope to see happen in my state, in my nation, in this world. And that is a form of journalism that the founders would have understood.
Exactly.
They did not establish a freedom of the press protection because they wanted journalists to use stenography to power. They didn't establish the freedom of the press because they wanted journalists to get along with presidents and governors and kings. They established freedom of the press so that journalists would go out there in the tradition of Tom Paine and scare the heck out of governors and presidents and kings.
Right.
And I hope sometimes I maybe speak well enough to do that.
Yeah. In other words, you don't need freedom of the press if the press is going to self-censor itself, as they so often do.
Exactly right.
You only need it if they're dangerous. What is the current situation in Wisconsin? I assume you have been bouncing back and forth between Wisconsin, Washington, New York, and so on, but what's the current situation in Wisconsin?
Well, I can tell you, I don't bounce too much. I canceled most of my trips out of Wisconsin. My family's rooted in Wisconsin. I'm a seventh-generation Wisconsinite. And so I didn't travel much. This is actually the first trip I've done, and I came out to New York to do a couple of talks this weekend. It's very rainy in Wisconsin, so I thought it was okay to miss a day or so. But the situation in Wisconsin is this. A month ago, the governor proposed a radical assault on labor union rights, the right to collectively bargain, and also a dramatic consolidation of power that would allow him to basically throw people off our Medicare and Medicaid programs without oversight by the legislature, to sell off our public properties, again, without oversight by the legislature and in no-bid deals. It's really a radical transformation of Wisconsin in many fundamental ways.
Let me cut in for a sec, John. The thing that people have heard about first was just, playing tough with the teachers' unions and the public service unions, and then finally people realized, it's not just playing tough, it's breaking them and taking away the... But these other aspects, he was basically doing a sort of a emergency law, martial law because of a financial crisis, right?
Pretty close. Michigan went even further.
That's right.
Michigan has proposed a takeover of local governments. It's quite radical. What Walker in Wisconsin has proposed is simply handing down a group of fiats, basically, that say, look, we're going to cut $1.6 billion from education and local government aids, and then we're going to demand that you balance your local budgets And the way we're going to do that is by giving you, quote unquote, the tools you will need. Well, the tool that they're giving them is the power to break their unions, to unilaterally cut pay, benefits, and pensions, and to end collective bargaining. And so this is radical stuff designed to completely tip the balance in any negotiation at the local, state, regional level against unions, against public employees, against the public sector. And this is very, very important. This really isn't just about union rights. This is about whether we have public services and public education in a way that is viable and functional. And so when this occurred, people really did rise up in incredible numbers. Last weekend, more than 100,000 people filling the square in Madison. Now, that popular uprising, frankly, convinced Democrats, who are usually very, very cautious, to step up and boldly challenge power, the Republican power in the state, even to deny Republicans a quorum to advance the bill. That was a very significant thing.
That was when they left the state, right?
They did.
Yeah.
Yes. And finally, the Republicans did force the bill through. Frankly, I think because they feared the popular movements were growing so large, so strong, so effective, that they were afraid that if they didn't do something fast, even their own Republicans were going to start to abandon them. And so they passed the law, but they did so hastily, so irresponsibly, with one vote lasting just 17 seconds and most Democrats not being allowed to vote, with a violation of the Open Meetings Law, with a number of actions that have been deemed to be, by very good lawyers, have been deemed to be unconstitutional. Now, all of those actions are in the courts, and on Friday, a judge in Dane County, which is the county around Madison, issued a temporary restraining order that blocks the publication of the law. This law is on hold. A law that should have been easily passed, easily enacted, easily put on the books and implemented, has been slowed down and now put on hold, thanks, without a doubt, to a popular uprising by hundreds of thousands of Wisconsinites who said that you may have won an election last November, but you did not win the right to take away our unions, to take away our right to collectively bargain, in fact, to take away our basic democratic rights. It's been a remarkable moment in Wisconsin, and I have to tell you that it's not over. It's going to go on, and it's going to get more and more interesting. Let me just say that.
Yeah, let me just say a couple of points. One, that you mentioned how the actions of the unions and the uproar from the people gave the Democratic legislators courage, but the legislators leaving the state and thus prolonging, kind of putting a stall on the government, allowed the movement to grow. So it seems to me it was a wonderful dance in terms of the way that played out.
Your insights are so spot on. That's exactly right. That is exactly what happened. And, this is one thing that the left doesn't have very often politically, and that is time. Usually, those in power rush to pass their laws. They do so behind closed doors, often late at night, and we watch as things happen to us. Because of the decision of the Democratic legislators to deny the Republican leadership the quorum they needed to rush this bill through, people had time to go to the streets, initially in thousands, then in tens of thousands, finally in hundreds of thousands. And this mass movement fed upon itself. It made legislators more courageous. It made people more committed. It also opened up a space where lawyers and others could step in and look at the wrongdoing by legislators and begin to file legal actions. And this is something I think is very important. Too often we segment our response. We say, there's a legal response, there's a political response, there's an in-the-streets protest response. That's not what's happened in Wisconsin. There's been a unitary and universal response that has gone across all sorts of sectors, gone across all sorts of levels of power. And it has been sufficient so far to prevent a Republican governor with Republican majorities in the legislature from doing what he wanted to do. That's a pretty remarkable thing.
One other thing, it also allowed it to become a national issue. So often things happen in one state, and unless it's so outrageous as in Arizona with the immigration law, these things do not get national coverage. It's in the middle of the country, it doesn't happen. But I know I have contributed, I've contributed money to run ads in Wisconsin. And that would have never happened if they hadn't had the time. So, but I think what you're saying, the last point you're making, which is that if we are willing to how bad things have gotten and how arrogant the corporations and their funded politicos have gotten, that it's going to take, as you say, not thinking, oh, this one calls for this kind of a solution or that. It's going to take a whole everything working in concert. Is the feeling in Wisconsin that although it was made up on the fly, there's some sort of a template here now?
I hope so, but I think that it's important to understand what that template is. It will be different in different states. Much of what happened in Wisconsin was rooted in our state's unique political traditions and, to some extent, unique political values. We had a progressive movement that was independent, third party, not linked to the Democrats or the Republicans, that really did put an imprint on the state in the last century. We've also had a great tradition of maverick and dissident politics. And I think that was a part of this. And so other states will have to develop their own responses, and they will emphasize aspects of their own traditions, aspects of their own strengths. But there are two things that I think come out of Wisconsin that are hugely important. Number one, solidarity. And I know that's a word we use too often, but often without a lot of meaning.
Right.
Understanding.
With nostalgia often.
What's that?
With nostalgia often.
There was no nostalgia here. I saw true solidarity. Students walking out with their teachers, police officers sleeping in the Capitol with students so that other police officers wouldn't drag the students out. Again and again, acts of remarkable solidarity and commitment across lines of race and class and gender and region. Incredibly powerful stuff. And I just want to emphasize, that's one thing that doesn't stop at the Wisconsin border. It's something we can take anywhere. Secondly, and I think just as important, is an understanding that democracy is not something that occurs on election day only. Democracy is a life. It begins and ends when we wake up and go to sleep. We should be small d Democrat citizens all the time. That doesn't mean we have to go to a march every 5 minutes, but it does mean that we should recognize that when power begins to assault our rights, when power begins to make radical and unacceptable changes in our basic civic life, to break our unions, to destroy our public services, to destroy our public schools, when this happens, that's when we have to use all of our small d democratic rights. And one of the most powerful of these rights, I think perhaps the most powerful of these rights, is the right to assemble.
Mm-hmm.
When we go into the streets, not 10 of us, not 100 of us, not 1,000 of us, but tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, when we do this, we force our elected officials to pay attention to us. We force even those who disagree with us to consider what we are saying. And those moments of people power, be it the civil rights movement, be it the anti-war movement, be it the labor movement today, those are the moments at which you achieve something more than politics. You do achieve democracy, and it's transformational.
That's the voice of John Nichols. We're talking about what's going on in Wisconsin and its ramifications for the rest of the country. John, I'm going to take a moment to read some facts, and then I'm going to come back and ask you sort of the implications. In other words, I'll just set it up. We've seen what citizens can do when they demand democracy in Tunisia and Egypt, and maybe in Madison, and sort of what's ahead here in the U.S. But let me just give people some facts. In terms of, even after years of right-wing messaging, Americans, at least in key swing states, don't have much taste for union busting, even in the public sector. A public policy polling survey of likely Wisconsin voters released February 28th found that if they were electing governor today, Democrat Tom Barrett would defeat Walker by a 52-45 margin, and other surveys have found solid support for collective bargaining rights. Recent national polls suggest Americans favor protecting collective bargaining by a 2-to-1 margin. So again, it's one of these things where people, if they're paying attention to American Idol and how to get food on the table, they're not paying attention to this. But once you wake them, that's what I'm hoping we've done here, is wake a sleeping giant by the overreach of Walker and the Koch brothers and so on, and the governor of Michigan and the governor of Florida, et cetera, that this sleeping giant goes, oh, I should be paying attention. And once they pay attention, they seem to come out on the side of of the people. A little bit also about Walker's funding. The Republican Governors Association, having collected $1 million check from Charles and David Koch, and smaller contributions from other corporate interests, invested at least $3.4 million in electing Walker. So $1 million of the Republican Governors Association gets its money and passed $3.5 million to elect Walker. His debt to the Koch brothers, whose PAC personally donated $43,000, was highlighted in his budget repair bill. As John pointed out, it's not just about busting unions. In addition to attacking unions, it outlined a plan to restructure state government so that he could sell off power plants, state-owned power plants, in no-bid deals to firms like Koch Industries, while restructuring the health insurance program so that tens of thousands of Wisconsinites would be stranded with no access to care. And finally, Wisconsin State Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald will head to the nation's capital Wednesday. I believe that is this coming Wednesday. Last Wednesday to collect tens of thousands of dollars in campaign donations from Washington-based lobbyists for corporate interests at the offices of BRG Lobbying Group. And that B stands for Barber, Haley Barber, head of that lobbying group and governor of Mississippi. Lobbyists and D.C. insiders will pay $1,000 apiece, or did pay $1,000 apiece, to attend the session with Fitzgerald, who I guess when this was scheduled was a hero, and then as things have turned out, maybe not quite as much. Sponsors will pay $2,500, hosts will pay $5,000. So this guy leaves Wisconsin to go to Washington to have a big lobby dinner to get more money to finance what's going on, just so it's really clear what's going on here. So, as I said, have they awoken a sleeping giant through their overreach? And what do you think it's going to take for what's happening in Wisconsin and to spread where it can actually have an effect in this country?
Well, I think it is spreading. There's simply no doubt of that. We've seen variations on what Wisconsin has done in Indiana, in Michigan, in Ohio. A mass demonstration the other day, very little covered in Maryland, with 15,000, 20,000 people showing up to defend public services. So there's a sense of this moving places and becoming more real. At this point, the Democratic Party, by and large, is having a very, very hard time with it. It hasn't bought into it. It hasn't understood it as well as it should.
The same way they played cautious with Egypt. It's funny.
Well, that's right. And I'm not sure where we end up. I'm not going to promise you that we're going to get, an easy route to economic and social justice, to a real democracy. But what I can tell you is that we've got the outlines of it. People know from just the news of what has occurred in Wisconsin that when you put great masses of people in the streets, you can upset the political apple cart. You can change the political process. And if your numbers grow, if your energy grows, you will get noticed. It will have an impact. I don't think we knew that as well as we should have 2 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. Now we do. And if we can export that, take it national, and then link it to our political life, we can be in the streets and also be at the polling places. We can begin to demand a better politics, one that is not defined by compromise, but is defined by our own reach, perhaps not the overreach of the Republicans, but our own reach for a fairer tax system, for a real response to the economic challenges of our times. If we begin to do that, I think we can start to tip the balance back. And frankly, I have to be honest with you, in the face of the Citizens United ruling, which gives...
That's where I was just about to go, John.
Yeah, well, it gives so much power in the electoral sector to corporations. I think our people power becomes more important. I mean, we can't just sit on the sidelines and, watch the TV ads, because the TV ads are going to be disproportionately bought by the corporations. We have to get out there and create the counterbalance that we can. The corporations may have the money to buy a lot of ads, but we have the money, we have the human resource of ourselves and of our great masses. And if we put them into the streets, if we use our energy in this way, I think that can begin to have a political impact. Once somebody goes to a demonstration, once they see who we are and what we're about, that this is a very beautiful movement rooted in people of all backgrounds and very, very good-spirited, very hopeful and faithful to a lot of the best of American values and the best of American hopes. I think it's much harder to sway or spin or lie to those people with a television ad.
Very good. Let me just say,
I'm a believer in mass movements. Yeah.
I commend, by the way, you and Bob McChesney did an article in The Nation, the Money and Media Election Complex, which can be found on the Nation website. And I'm just going to read one paragraph from that article. The money and media election complex has transformed long-standing problems into an existential crisis. We're about to lose the democratic promise of elections. It is hard to see how our cherished freedoms can then survive except to the extent they are trivial and unthreatening to those in power. What hangs in the balance is democracy itself, along with the promise of the American experiment. I thoroughly agree. And that was written before Wisconsin. So now what we see is maybe the crisis in the polling booth and the crisis in campaigns has gotten worse, but maybe through their overreach we've ignited a counter that they can't counter.
I hope you're right.
Okay.
I am a journalist. I don't tell you what's going to happen. I'm not a psychic. I'm not a seer. But what I can tell you is I think we've got the outline now to take this thing on. Where we end up, I don't know. But I'm going to tell you one thing that I am sure of. I think once people start to protest, they don't like to stop until they get what they want.
Very good. I'm going to have to let it go at that. I'm Terrence McNally. That's the voice of John Nichols, Washington correspondent for The Nation, one of the founders of FreePress.net and associate editor of the Madison Times in Madison, Wisconsin. You can learn more at thenation.com. You can listen to this week's conversation and many others at any time during the week by linking to the podcast. You can sign up to have it delivered to you weekly at iTunes or at my website, TerrenceMcNally.net, TerrenceMcNally.net, which is also aworldthatjustmightwork.com. Same website, whichever one's easier for you to remember. If you want to receive my weekly email announcement telling you who's going to be on and what we're going to talk about, you can sign up at the website or by emailing me at TEMcNally@mac.com, TEMcNally@mac.com. And finally, thank you to John Nichols. Keep up the good work.